Today on the angrycatholic.com radio show, we're going to tackle, are you ready to fight? Our angry item of the day is, what is the final battle? And the Angry Catholic goes one-on-one with Doug Barry. All right, welcome. You are listening to another edition of the angrycatholic.com radio show. I am Paul the Angry Catholic. With me in the studio today, again, is my lovely wife, Chris.
I'm always here.
And we're very blessed today to have the one and only Doug Barry. How you doing, Doug?
I'm doing good, and I'm angry.
Well, that's good. You're in the right place.
I am.
This is where we get angry.
This is great. When you called me and said, would you like to do the Angry Catholic show, I thought, yeah, because everybody around my house is, tired of hearing me talk about how angry I am about certain things. So this is great.
Yeah, well, our motto is enough is enough,
Yeah.
and we just figured, this show is all about having open and honest conversations in a public format about what's going on in the church.
Yeah.
And I can't think anybody better be with us today that you're talking to people all over the country, if not the world, about what's going on in the church. So if you could give us a little background on you, I want to let everybody know, if you want to get in touch with what Doug Barry is doing, go on to battlereadystrong.com. That's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yes, battlereadystrong.com. Also, our Facebook page, just under Doug Barry. It's Barry, for anybody wondering. I'm not a strawberry or a blueberry. My mom was going to name me Straw, but she's afraid I'd get made fun of at school and be blue.
My son actually asked me the other day when he found out you were coming on, he goes, Dad, ask him, what's his favorite berry? I'm like, I think that's off the table, Joe.
Well, I have 6 of them. My wife and my 5 kids. Those are my favorite berries right there.
There we go. There we go.
Good answer.
So what is Battle Ready?
Battle Ready is an effort that kind of grew out of an apostolate that we started, my wife and I started 29 years ago, called Radix.
29 years ago.
29 years, yeah. Radix is a Catholic apostolate. Radix, by the way, is a Latin word that means root. It's where you get the English word radical. And to be radical means really to go to the heart of something or the root of something.
Okay.
Being radical doesn't mean, far out, bizarre, has nothing to do with Doritos or surfing or even being Republican. Being radical means you go to the root or the heart of something. So the idea behind Radix was, let's get to the root, the basics of the faith, because there's a lot of people out there, we all say we want to go to heaven, even those who struggle believing in heaven or hell. Nobody wants to go to hell. Nobody likes that idea.
Sure.
But what does it take to get there? Well, in general, there's some very basic, simple things that even our Lord talks about. Take him, denying yourself every day, take up your cross and follow him. Follow the 10 Commandments. Some basic nuts and bolts. You don't have to be a great theologian or
Do
or a
people even know
philosopher.
the 10 Commandments?
Oh, are you kidding? This is something I ask all over the country. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. What did Jesus say to the rich man in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 19? I've been doing this for years. Hundreds of times I've asked this question. When the rich man approached Jesus and says, "Good master, what must I do to enter into everlasting life?" Our Lord gives him a 2-part answer. Now, for anybody who gets the answer, they almost always, 95% of the time, get the second part, which is sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and follow me.
Sure.
But the first part, where Jesus says, if you wish to enter into everlasting life, you need to follow the commandments, almost nobody gets that. If they do get it even, my next question is, or once we get to this point of the conversation, who can stand up and recite the 10 Commandments?
And everybody raises their hand?
Oh, well, I like to bring money into it. So I'll offer money a lot of times in a presentation, right, in a talk, in a school, a church, doesn't matter where I am. I'll give you $20 if you can stand up and recite the 10 Commandments, but you have to do it backwards from 10 to 1. First the even numbers and then the odd, and do it in 30 seconds or less.
And that's only worth 20, huh?
Yeah, only $20. I'll tell you what, though, the record is, by the way, only, I'd say maybe 1% of the time does anybody get it. And almost always, those who do are homeschooled.
Okay.
Gotcha.
That's it. That is almost always the only ones who gets it.
Go homeschoolers.
But the record is a 14-year-old girl who did it in 15 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah, it was my daughter. It was, yeah, So,
and you gave her $20?
Probably not. I probably didn't pay her for that one. But no, in general, the idea is get to the basics and the root of the faith. That's what Radix is all about. So about 9 years ago, give or take, 8-9 years ago, I'm walking through the office back home, and one of my sons was working for me at the time. And I said, son, we need to come up with something that wakes up the fighting spirit in men, because a lot of men are really struggling with the faith, and that is we can talk all night about. The reality of a lot of our families struggling like they do is because dad is not the spiritual head of the home like he's supposed to be. He's not only not leading people in prayer and the family, talking about the faith. He's not on his own, behind the scenes, fighting the battle spiritually. Sure. Calling upon the power of Jesus to bind the demons that are attacking his family and throw them, literally, the hell out of the family. And so, we wanted to wake up the fighting spirit in men. Well, the idea of battle ready came out of that conversation between me and my son. And this term of being battle ready, simply being ready for the battle, ready for the fight, body, mind, and soul, because it's evil manifests in many different ways, kind of grew from this conversation. I sent out emails, and then eventually the emails grew to someone inviting me to come in and give a talk at a church in Kentucky. There was the first official, what I call battle ready rally.
Okay.
Parish missions all over the place, rally people together, talk hard and fast about the reality of the spiritual fight that we're all in. Everybody knows this. I always say if you're married longer than a week, you know that there are troubles and problems that can come at any moment.
Sure.
And most of it is geared around us not mastering our passions, our anger, our fear, our resentment, our lack of forgiveness in a marriage. These are all things the demons use very, very well against us. So the spiritual battle I like to talk about is not so much possessions, exorcisms, and so forth. That's out there. It needs to be discussed. Okay, it's not even just talking about things like abortion, the evil of abortion. That's part of it as well, no doubt. But it's in every home, every family, every heart, every soul. The great Russian author, can't pronounce his name, who said that the battle between good and evil goes to the heart of every single man and woman. Every single person has to deal with it. It's a battle. And so that's really where the idea came from, to be battle ready. Is we're all fighting it, and we need to fight it better, because we're getting our backsides kicked around.
And as a father, what are the reasons that us fathers are not leading our families? What do you find in that regard? Like, are there a few reasons, like you can say, oh, A, B, C are the main reasons, or is it just a multiplicity of all different kind of reasons?
It's multifaceted, and I find this out all over the place. Several of the top answers to that question, I think, would be, number one, we're distracted. We're distracted by even things that are not in and of themselves bad, but the plethora of access is overwhelming. Sports, hunting, fishing, hobbies in general. We have the Golf Channel, the NFL Channel. We have NASCAR channel on TV. We can spend 24/7
Sure.
engaging in our hobbies now. We can do it through our smartphones. We can fill ourselves, sedate ourselves with these dopamine hits. And you do get a chemical dopamine hit when you get that pleasure center of the brain affected by anything from a video game to a basketball game, a baseball game, you name it. So depending on whether you're a kid.
So it doesn't even have to be like porn.
No.
I mean, you're just talking inundated
anything. We're distracted. Now, porn is obviously a greater evil when it comes to that, because that in and of itself is bad, is evil. But even the good things, men who want to have a good financial base for their family, want to take care of their family well, but they become consumed with it to the point where I identify myself as a man with my work, with the money that I'm making. Guys find success with the car they drive, the house they have, the credit score. Oh, the credit score. That determines how well you're doing in life. Are you kidding me? Look, you don't go to hell for having a bad credit score. It depends on whether you've been disciplined with what you have, and you're going to fall on bad times. Your credit score is going to drop because you got laid off of work or sickness or whatever it may be. But the point is, distraction, I think, is one of the number one things in multiple different ways. Number two, though, is there's been a lot of, I call it neutering of men. The feminization of men, the emasculation of men. So far, it's gotten so far now that we have college campuses that are starting to teach toxic masculinity classes because they see masculinity as a problem. And men are cowering to this. All right? And the more I hear about that, the more I want to come out with I'm a toxic masculine man in the truest sense of the form. What I mean by that is the way God has designed me to be a man, to be ready to go through a wall to save someone's life if I'm called to, run into a house if it's burning, and drag everybody out if I can, dying in the process, not wanting to. Here's an example. I do a lot of men's conferences. I speak at men's conferences everywhere, and I like to ask sometimes the group of men, I'll bring this up sometimes, who here loves your family? Oh, I love my family. Who would fight for your family? Oh, I'd fight for my family. Who would die for your family? Yeah, I'd die for my family. Yeah, but the goal is to not die. Because once you die, then your family doesn't have you around to protect them anymore. So what's the number one goal? Learn how to fight. Learn how to fight. Learn how to be ready to protect and defend your family in every way possible. So yeah, the idea behind we've been obviously the distraction, I think, is number one in many respects because it's so multifaceted. But then you also have that we have been neutered, we've been feminized, we have been emasculated, we have just been told you're not to be the man God made you to be. Be a different kind of man now. And now we've transgendered that whole thing too. So now you don't even want to call someone a man because you might get a lawsuit because you use the wrong pronoun.
Sure.
I mean, we are upside down when it comes to these things. These things are really, really creating a lot of the problems.
Do men come up to you after like a conference or something a little relieved because it seems like you give them permission to actually be who they are?
Exactly. That happens all the time. I've had guys come up to me and almost whisper, "Hey, by the way, I want to thank you for saying it's okay if I actually own a firearm at home, because I thought it was all right, but I just but I'm a Knight of Columbus or I'm an usher or whatever it may be, and I'm prominent in one sense or another in my parish, and I don't want to make it look like I'm just trying to be what a man. I mean, and be ready. And that doesn't if you don't want to have a firearm, that's fine. That's up to you. But don't feel bad if you have a plan to protect and defend your family. Sure. So yeah, men do come up all the time. And they give me that kind of high five sort of, man, thanks for doing this. This is great. One guy came up, hey, I appreciate this, man, because I go home and tell my wife I'm going to buy a gun. It's like
so you're really popular at times. Yeah.
I am. Oh yeah, gun shops love me because I'm driving up their business.
Women might whisper about it too, but I think women are probably happy too because the reality is a woman is attracted to a man.
Yeah.
She wants a man. She doesn't want, the guy who's in his parents' basement playing video games,
right.
who's saying he's pro-choice and whatever you want,
right.
that's fine with you. And she wants someone who's going to, take charge and would care for her, that she's worth fighting for.
100% agree, because I've had the women come up to me and also say to me, thank you so much, because I felt like my husband should have been, but I didn't even know how to approach it. Now, I've had many young ladies approach me in their 20s and early 30s and even say, hey, I got to say, I'm really tired of the way men are these days. We can't find a man to marry. One lady put it this way, sums up what a lot of girls have said in different ways, is that we see men in two categories. You got the nice guy who goes to Bible study. He prays with us. He's a nice guy. But I feel like if somebody broke in the room, this is what she said, this particular lady said to me, I feel like he'd hide behind me. Or you got the guys out there that are the lumberjack kind of, nothing against lumberjacks. I got friends who, work in the logging industry, but in general, they feel like, it's all about being tough and rugged in your beard, drinking a beer in your beard and smoking a pipe. That's what they see as masculinity. And yet some of these women will say, why can't we have a blend of the two? I want a tough, strong man who's not afraid to roll up his sleeves, work a 20-hour day if he has to, go through a wall to save a life, but he can also cradle the child in the arms, rock her to sleep, say prayers, lead the family in scripture, you name it. Sure. I want that combination, ladies are saying, of the masculine man and the spiritual man, because that's what we're created to be. But it needs to be talked about more.
Sure. All right. I think you got some marching orders from Doug Barry here on the AngryCatholic.com radio show. And make sure you go on to BattleReadyStrong.com and check it out. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. You're listening to the AngryCatholic.com radio show. I'm Paul the Angry Catholic. Still with me is my lovely wife, Chris.
That's right.
And Doug Barry's hanging out with us today in the studio. He's going to stay here with us for the Angry Item of the Day. Mm-hmm. The Angry Item of the Day is, what is the final battle? And I just want to caution listeners right now, if you have any young children, and we're not going to get graphic about we're not going to get real graphic about this, but it is a very difficult subject. So if there's little ears around there, feel free, turn it off, listen to it in private, but some of the just the topic matter is very disturbing, and that's why it's the Angry Item of the Day. So what is the final battle? Where I came up with this from is I was listening to Doug Barry in his presentation, and he said something, I won't quote it, but he said something like, every 2 minutes a woman or young girl is abused or sold in the human sex trafficking. Is that correct, what you said?
Yes, exploited in some way sexually in the sex trafficking industry.
Well, that's disgusting.
And is that worldwide?
That's it's believed that it's a global problem. So throughout the world, they estimate this, and it's probably worse than that because it's such a dark and deeply hidden industry.
Now, would that be included in the statistic that I've heard that like the porn business or the sex business is like a $60 billion industry. Is that tied in with that, you think?
You know, the different reports I've read and the people I've talked to who are involved in human trafficking, they're fighting against it, and I've met several around the country. They will say that these numbers are most likely, again, not where they really are, but the porn industry does, in some ways, some of the studies will say includes this sex trafficking industry. It's a very difficult thing for them to really wrap entire accuracy around the numbers, but they do know that they're very deeply intertwined.
And they're huge.
Oh, they're huge.
It's an epidemic.
They are. The numbers are higher. The money that's made is more than predominantly all of your organized sports combined in America. So you take Major League Baseball, football, basketball, and so forth, combine them all, and they're not making nearly the money that the porn industry or the sex trafficking industry makes. It is completely off the charts evil.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. Wow. I want to ask you? I happened to see a clip of Bill Maher on Real Time just last night, Friday night. He was saying, "Poor Bob Kraft. He's lost his wife of all these years, and he was just down in Florida." Trying to have a happy ending, and he made kind of a joke, but he felt it was bad. And there was a part of me, I felt bad that Bob Kraft, he owns the Patriots, correct?
Correct.
That he had been so humiliated with visiting a massage parlor. But what's your response on the other end, knowing what's going on with the sex trafficking? I mean, isn't he? I mean, he's involved in that.
It's definitely contributing to the industry. Of the sex trafficking industry, it contributes to the entire problem. You know.
Now, do you think Bob, in this case, I'll just jump in here. Do you think Bob would have any idea that the women, and I'm not close to the case. I didn't read the stories and all, but the women there were being held under their will? Like, I mean, maybe does he think maybe they're volunteers, or that's just something they? I'm just asking you because
I know.
You know what I mean?
Because I think a lot of people, I mean, I haven't interviewed or talked with people who have been, those who spend money on it, who frequent it, for their personal reasons. But the people that I've talked with are the people who are involved in trying to help people break free from the sex traffic industry, or law enforcement who've dealt with it.
Okay.
And what I hear from them is a lot of those who spend money and access these individuals, these poor women, and some are prostitutes that are there of their own free will, but they've been treated and shaped and formed to kind of accept this as their life.
Sure.
But in general, a lot of them are unsuspecting that there is some servitude going on here, some enslavement going on here. But there are a good number who do know.
Okay.
And that's one of the thrills they get from it, is they know that these kids, 12, as young sometimes as they estimate 8 and 9, 10 years old. And they know that there is something very devious about it, and that's part of the thrill that they get, is to be able to hide in the shadows. I mean, a number of the people that are involved in this, who again frequent these exploited, sex trafficked individuals, they're married, they have children, they're officials in government, it's across the board, they're athletes. I talked with an individual out in California when I was out there a while back, and they spoke of the fact that even in the movie industry out there in Hollywood, you've got a number of people that are involved in the sex trafficking aspect of it. Now, other stories have come out too about this. Corey Feldman and others who've come out and said the pedophilia going on in Hollywood, but there's a whole sex trafficking ring that takes place, and there's a lot of big dollars being spent. And part of the excitement is these kids are trafficked. They're coming in from other parts of the world, and they're young, and there's something very, very deeply dark and sadistic about the whole thing. So yeah, some know, some don't, some know.
So now, for our angle, on our sake, like, have you heard of what's the church as far as being? I mean, we're all over the place. We're hugely funded. What's the church doing in an organized way to help this problem? Because obviously it's a huge problem.
It is. Yeah. I have not heard very much at all. If anybody does know of anything, contact me. Email me through battlereadystrong.com or message me through my Facebook page, Doug Barry. I would love to know more what's going on. I've started to get more involved in this, talk about it more,
Sure.
and promote stuff in social media to make people more aware of this, because it's such a hidden, messed up world that there are so many different layers of this onion to peel back and try to find how we can help free these kids, but also help people who are doing this. Bob Kraft, for example, he's got a problem. You just throw the guy in jail or fine him or what have you, but that doesn't fix the problem. It's deeply rooted in someone that's willing to risk their entire family, the humiliation and everything that goes with it. But more seriously, the abusing of someone else in that scenario. The child or the individual who's being prostituted at this point.
Sure.
There's a deep problem on every side of this that needs to be addressed. Now, is the church doing much about it? You don't hear much about it. No, you definitely don't.
Well, that's what surprised me about the whole thing. Like when you said that, and it's not that I haven't heard anything about any of this, but when you said that, it really sparks. I'm like, what?
Yeah, well, I feel like because we're, like obviously you might not hear it in a homily because you're sitting with your family on Sunday, and it may, but I mean, you don't even hear in a homily the problem of porn that is sitting in that congregation right in front of you. But I'm trying to think, like I follow the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I follow a lot of Catholic websites. I read different bishops around the country. I really haven't heard anything about this.
I haven't either. I mean, I know of a couple individual priests who are trying to do something about it. They're trying to make it more, make people more aware of the reality of it. So, number one, you keep your guard up, and if you see a situation that looks like this looks bad, we got to turn somebody in here, or we got to investigate. But in general, is there an all-out effort to really fight this battle? No. If it's there, it's not being made public. And it's one of the most uncomfortable things to talk about, no question. The porn issue is a very difficult thing for people to talk about.
Well, thank God for Matt Fradd.
He's done great stuff on it.
He actually, helped me. It's like he gave me license to talk about it with my kids. And not that we haven't ever talked about it with kids, because we have, but it's like after listening to Matt, and I got to meet him because, he was at our men's conference in a previous year. But I felt like emboldened, like I can now, talk to my son in a boldly instead of just, kind of dancing around it. And it really helped me out. Yeah. And thank God that he's really made this an issue that people actually can talk about.
Well, Dad needs to talk, because my sons have let me know prior to Dad talking, as a mom, you're like, that's someone's sister. That could be your sister. But apparently that isn't the most effective way to reach your young men. Right. It's really the dad who needs to talk about it.
Well, I know when I said to one of my sons years ago, when the subject of purity came up, and he came to me one night, one of my sons, I have 4 sons, and I was in my office getting ready for a trip, and he came in, Dad, can I talk to you? I said, yeah. And he closed the door, and he never does this, Wow. And whenever that happens, I always say, you got to give undivided attention when your kid comes in and he's talking to you about something serious. So stop what you're doing, turn your chair, face him, whatever. And he started to ask me some questions. He hadn't even done anything wrong, but he was young enough, 13, 14. He had some questions about interaction, relationships, attractions, and so forth to young women, why he was feeling the way he was, and this and that. So everything was on the up and up. But in the conversation, I looked at him and I said, I need you to know something, son. What you did here, this conversation, we talked for quite a while about it. And I said, was the best thing you could have done. I want you and all my sons to know, I will always listen when you have conversations about this, always. Because I'm not just your father. I'm your ally. And then I hugged him. And he tells me even today, that meant everything to him to say, I'm your ally.
Sure.
Because when mom says I'm your ally, it's like, yeah, Mom, you don't quite get it because the hormone system is set up differently, right? We don't react the same way to visual. When Archbishop Fulton Sheen, Venerable Fulton Sheen, God bless him, made it clear, woman is created from the rib of Adam, close to the heart of man. So she has...
Is that evolution you're talking about? Oh, no, I'm just asking.
No.
Okay.
Don't make me angrier than
Sorry
I
about
am.
that.
But therefore, she has an interior intuition that man doesn't have, because she is created from the bone close to the heart, whereas Adam is created from the earth. So he has a more physical, tangible side to him. And so the two, one not better than the other, cooperate with each other.
Sure.
And it's all God's design. So, yeah, when you go to your son as a father and say, hey, we got to sit and talk about something because I know what you're going through. And just because I'm older doesn't mean I don't still experience to some degree, or that I have forgotten where you are now, when I was there, whatever it may be. But this has to happen, because the bigger part of the problem is we don't address it. it grows. The world attacks. The devil attacks. The struggle with the faith everybody goes through. They get out into the so-called real world. This industry, for example, the porn industry, the sex trafficking industry, is there, and everything is directed at sexualizing, super sexualizing everything in our society now. So if we're not preparing our boys for this battle, they're going to get their clock clean.
Well, plus we're fooling ourselves. If the number is, let's say, 60 billion, it takes a lot of people to add up $60 billion.
And there's a lot of Catholics
that are
participating in this.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Look, this isn't something that, some of these guys, most of the people that we know are affected by this.
Oh, sure. There's no doubt about it. And when you think about, we've got truck stops, and we've got labor camps around the country. When I say labor camps, excuse me, I mean physical labor like mining or farming, whatever it may be, where you've got a number of employees. I mean, in this sex trafficking trade, they will bring girls. They'll drive them down the highway. They've got them stowed away in a van or a bus. They're hidden. They take them to these places. They set up shop at a truck stop for a night, or at some like a barracks or a cabin somewhere out at a some labor area where people are just picking crops, whatever it may be, and men will line up 30, 40, 50 throughout a night, and they'll abuse these girls, and then they'll load them up in a truck or a car, and they'll move them to the next location. This is going on, and a lot of people on various degrees of socioeconomics, lifestyles, backgrounds, whatever, are taking part in this.
That's mind-blowing.
It's political people that are caught taking part. Athletes are taking part in this stuff. Married men with children are taking part in this sort of stuff. This is something that we should be not just angry about, we should be actively angry about in the right and truly just way.
All right. Well, I can only suggest that this won't be the last time we're going to be discussing this topic. We'll have to do a little more research, and we'll definitely come back with you on some more information. But don't go anywhere. You're listening to the angrycatholic.com radio show. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. You're listening to the angrycatholic.com radio show. I'm Paul the Angry Catholic, and right now the Angry Catholic's going one-on-one with Doug Barry. So Doug's in the studio with me still. How you doing, Doug?
Good, real good.
All right, I have a couple questions for you. Before we get to that question, though, I want to remind everybody, go on to battlereadystrong.com and check out Doug Barry. All right, so for the questions.
Amen.
We're both, husbands. Not to each other, obviously. But so we're both husbands. We're both fathers.
Did that really need to be
said?
No. Well, maybe in today's world, but let's make clear to the audience.
They know.
Happily married 29 years to my beautiful, lovely wife.
Yes, also, me too. And everybody here knows my lovely wife. So as husband and father,
right.
How do you do that in the culture? I mean, we just talked about some crazy stuff. I mean, children, women are being, abducted. They're in the slave trade. You're talking about being ready, battle ready, spiritually and physically. So now you have, you have children. You have a wife. How do we deal with this as men? And specifically, I mean for the family, for dealing with those everyday situations. All kinds of things come up. I have a large family, and it's craziness all the time. I love it. I wouldn't change any minute of it. But engaging our children, engaging our wives. How do we do it?
A couple of words come to my mind, and the first word is maturity, right? And the other word is responsibility. The reason those words come to mind is, as a Catholic, as a Christian of any denomination in today's society, but since we're focusing on Catholic here, Angry Catholic and all, talking about these things like the sex traffic industry that we just did, or the porn industry, or even when I've discussed with people the reality of the prophecies of the Blessed Mother, church-approved prophecies of the last 100 years.
Sure.
Fatima,
just real quick, just for our listeners, in case they don't know, what is a church-approved apparition, or just a little bit of explanation? So
good.
Just
I'm glad you
we
brought
don't
that
lose
up.
anybody.
Yeah, when someone says the Blessed Mother, for example, is appearing to me, and I'm seeing
Correct.
visions of her, apparitions of her, and I'm receiving messages of some sort, or even locutions, which are interior messages, the church will thoroughly investigate to make sure that it is truly of supernatural origin, or if the person is having some emotional or psychological, some psychotic event,
Okay.
and it's something else going on there. They will thoroughly investigate. If there are messages, the messages have to be thoroughly studied to make sure that they do not in any way contradict with church teaching and so forth and such. So the church will thoroughly study these things.
So on that, I've always thought, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is there's actually some that are probably valid or real, but because the church couldn't prove it, like that's the extent of their investigation, like it's that thorough where it's got to be beyond the shadow of the doubt. People can take that to the bank. This really happened as they said. I just
there are some that they won't condemn because they have no reason to condemn them.
Sure.
But they also won't come right out and say, yeah, this is one that's worthy of devotion, worthy of faith.
Okay.
And they'll kind of sit on the shelf, so to speak.
Okay.
There aren't very many like that, but there are some like that. Yes, exactly.
I just want to make sure. So
Yeah, that's exactly the case. But Fatima, for example, 1917, one of the most famous apparitions of the Blessed Mother. And I've talked about this all over the place. I talk a lot about the apparitions because the seriousness of her messages for our times, which people, I don't want to hear this. It's doom and gloom. It's sky is falling stuff. No, it isn't. In 1917, when the Blessed Mother appeared to the three children in Fatima during World War I, which was from 1914 to 1918, and she said that this war will come to an end soon. This was July 13th, 1917. And
Right.
the children were 7, 9, and 10 years old. And she told them this war will end soon, but if man does not stop offending God, there will be a second war. It will be far worse than this one. And 20 years later, we had World War II. It was far worse. The death toll of World War I was around 22 to 25 million, depending on different historical accounts. The death toll by the end of World War II was in the neighborhood of 70 million people. Not to mention, the atomic bomb and the death camps, and you just name, there was untold horror that went on during World War II.
Sure.
So Our Lady prophesies chastisement, and we cannot forget, and this is where maturity needs to come in. We have to be mature enough to realize this is coming from heaven. All right, this isn't some pie in the sky nut job sitting in their basement thinking, oh, Blessed Mother's telling me this. No, this is from heaven. The church has approved thoroughly tremendous devotions to Our Lady Fatima. Her message was not a message of, hey, you guys are doing great, hang in there.
right.
Her message was, you're not doing great. You need to clean up your act or else. Because that number one kind of hinge or linchpin that was going to bring about the second chastisement of World War II was this statement again, if you do not stop offending God. Now, you look at where we were in 1938, roughly, when 1938-39, when World War II was really getting going. Where were we morally compared to where we are now? Okay, so there's a lot to consider here. That's where I think the responsibility comes in. You have to be responsible enough to look at these things and realize, okay, this is what's going on. This is what's actually practically happening. Practical application of what's going on with our faith today. This is happening. Okay. You mentioned earlier about the... or your wife mentioned earlier, Chris here, about the reality of certain things not being mentioned from the pulpit, like on sex trafficking and so
Sure.
forth. Well, contraception is almost never talked about anywhere.
Never.
And that, they say, up to 80, 90% of everyone, even Catholics, is here are contracepting. Well, They never called me number one, by the way. I didn't want to mention that. And I'll tell you that, no, I never have. But the point is that this is an egregious evil. It's intrinsically evil, as the Catechism teaches, and it's not talked about almost anywhere. But back in 1938, 39, when World War II began, it was rare compared to where it is now.
Sure.
All right, so we have these things, these moral issues. We have to be responsible. We have to be mature and see things for what they are. Now, that being said, how do we as fathers, back to your original question about how do we handle this, Paul? We have to look at it through mature eyes, responsible eyes, and realize this is our time. This is what's happening. I have to own this moment that I am in, that God has put me here for, and I have to do something about it. So with regards to what I do, what does it extend to? Well, what is my obligation, my responsibility? My job is not to advise the Pope.
Sure.
My job is not to advise my bishop. I can send letters, I can encourage, I can pray for him, but I'm not on his inner circle council, right?
Sure.
But my job is the woman on the other end of this ring and the children that God has blessed us with. And so that's the real extent of my immediate responsibility. Outside of that, yes, I must be a witness to the rest of those that God involves in my life, work, school, wherever we go. But how do we handle it? We handle it with maturity. We handle it with responsibility. And we do not ignore what is happening right now. because the fact that we're ignoring it is one of the reasons we're seeing it explode to the degree that it is right now. We've ignored the sex trafficking thing. We've ignored the contraception. We've ignored the pornography. We've ignored the horrible teachings in a lot of our Catholic schools, high schools, grade schools, colleges. Fulton Sheen himself said before he died in 1979, I believe is when he died, he even said, if you want to ruin your kid's faith, send them to a Catholic school in America.
Sure.
I mean, these are very clear signs that we're seeing of our times.
Sure.
Oh, but don't talk about it. Why? Because it's too heavy. Well, that's not the mature answer. The mature answer is, yes, it's heavy, but let's respond responsibly and do what's best.
Sure. Yeah, and it goes right along with as far as the so-called Catholic institutions that are out there. I think what makes that far worse is when you call yourself a Catholic institution and you behave like you're not.
Right.
I think that's to me that's one of the biggest issues. There. Like
it
just
is.
don't call yourself Catholic then, and be a great institution, but don't fudge those lines.
Yeah, you subvert the mission. You really hijack it when you're saying, "Oh, we're Catholic, but we're not true to the teachings of the church." Well, okay, you're making it worse then.
Yep, no doubt.
Yeah.
Now, what is because you speak all over the country. This is a huge part of your life.
Right.
The faith, speaking. What kind of reaction you get from your wife, your kids, maybe your neighbor, maybe an aunt, an uncle, what kind of reaction are you getting? Because I know my kids think we're bat crazy for doing what we're doing right now. I can guarantee. I just see the looks, they're like, they think it's great, but then you're like, oh, they got to think these parents are nuts.
It's different. You mentioned the neighbor, and I had to look at my son, who's actually in the room right now. My neighbor, we have had encounters with the neighbors where they publicly went after me for some different efforts we were trying to do for evangelization purposes on a larger scale. And I mean, to the city council meetings.
I love my neighbors. I do. I absolutely do have great neighbors. But anyway.
Yeah, some of our neighbors were in support of what we were doing, but there were some that really they mounted an entire attack against us publicly. With regards to my wife and my children, in general, my wife and I are very equally yoked with regards to this. Now, obviously, different personalities. The style that I use, that I feel God has given me, always needs to be honed. I understand that, and my wife is my greatest sandpaper.
Okay.
And sometimes
sandpaper. I like that.
Sometimes she's 80 grit, and sometimes she's a nice fine 220 grit. So you ladies have the ability to do that.
Sandpaper. I'm going to use that.
But in general, my wife and I are very equally yoked on this stuff. She feels very passionate about these things too. I'm the more public voice than she is, but she can get into conversations about this stuff. Yeah, my kids, in different ways at different times of their life, it's been heavier, it's been lighter. Some of my older children are definitely fired up about some of this stuff too. They see it, but yeah, there are times I'm sure they've thought, Dad, okay, it's quite a bit.
Right.
But I think they understand, because as they mature and become more responsible too, if they really think about it, and a couple have said in different ways, they realize I do this for a living. So I'm in California one week, and then I'm in Seattle, and then I'm in Miami, and then I'm in Texas, and then I'm in Wisconsin, and here I am in the middle of the country. Am I allowed to say where I am? By the way?
Sure.
Okay. All right. I'm in Ohio. Is it Ohio? Is that where I am?
We're in a dungeon in Northeast Pennsylvania. Pretty much a dungeon.
In a building that you can't tell we're in. No, but in all seriousness, everywhere I go, and I'm out a lot throughout the year at times, sometimes busier than others, but I bring it home. Now, you have to detach from it so that it doesn't consume you. But when you're looking at faces of people, oftentimes you don't want to hear any of this. You have people get up and walk out of your talk. Sometimes it's a priest.
Sure.
Okay? I mean, one time I had a priest get up, walk up, stand 10 feet to the side of me. That was his way of saying, you're done.
Wow.
Stop. Okay? Because he didn't like what I was talking about.
Sure.
So, those moments you bring back home. Now, most of the time I don't talk much about it. I may drop a couple of things here and there to my family because I want them to be aware of what's going on outside the realm of their home. It's important. They need to know. It's a much bigger world.
Sure.
But in general, you got to know when to vent that stuff and how to vent that stuff so you don't overwhelm your family.
Sure. All right. No, I appreciate that. Now, the next kind of question that I have, it's probably going to sound a little weird, but I'm going to go for it anyway. As a dad, right? And I've had so many conversations with my kids about like important issues, something that's going on right then, or something that we're dealing with, or I know as a father that I'm about to deal with. But unfortunately, my kids haven't been there for most of them. So I have these conversations. You know, I drive for a living, so I'm out on the road all the time. So I do a lot of thinking, and it's unfortunate because I've had some fantastic conversations about some of these issues
with yourself.
with myself.
Yeah.
You know, like for my kids, with my kids, that kind of thing. And somehow they don't. Many of them, they don't even reach my kids. But in my mind, I'm like, hey, I worked all through that. I feel great. So I think they're getting the short end of the stick on some of these things. I mean, am I just bat nuts? Like, or is this something people actually do? And that's why I want to go to you, because, you know, you go and you speak about these, you know, Catholic issues and serious topics, spiritual, you know, battle ready, physical and spiritual. You know, is it pretty bad or?
Yeah, that's probably 2 steps before being institutionalized. I think is what they, you know.
All right, at least.
No, you know what? I do the same sort of thing at times, and I think
I might be exaggerating a little bit, but
Right.
it's still that, you know, it's happening.
Look, we have to realize that there was a reason why in the history of our church we've had countless saints who in one way or another said, win the world for Christ. Okay, well, what does that mean? They dealt with their evils, their heresies, their problems at their time. We're dealing with ours. They were very much like we are in many respects. We hear about the saints after they're canonized most of the time.
Sure.
And Mother Angelica had even said, you know, the biographers of saints should spend 40 years in purgatory because they write stuff that sanitizes a lot of their lives.
Sure.
Like a lot of these saints were just driven and they were passionate. St. Anthony, when he'd preach in the towns, nobody wanted to listen to him. My son has a devotion to St. Anthony here in the room. And, you know, my son's in the room, not St. Anthony. But, you know, but St. Anthony would preach in the towns. They didn't want to hear him. He'd go out and he'd preach to the fish. And the famous story of fish sticking their heads out of the water to listen to him. St. Francis of Assisi would preach to the birds, and they'd all stay there until he would bless them and send them off. I mean, the saints were so passionate about the faith. They saw what was going on. They knew there were corrupt kings, you know, corrupt leaders of different types out there.
Sure.
They knew when society was drifting from God, and they were passionate about it. That's why they're saints. There are many out there who were not canonized, who were the same way.
Sure.
You know, and so, but I think you try to refrain. What you say there, Paul, makes me think about what this is literally one of my famous scripture verses, one of my favorite ones out there. It's famous. It is the interior crisis of Saint Jeremiah. And you know, it's funny with Old Testament saints, we don't call them saints like Saint Moses, Saint Abraham,
Right.
But we know
They're
they
saints,
are.
right?
I mean, Transfiguration. You had,
Right.
you know. Anyway, with Jesus and Moses and Elijah. But the point I'm getting at is Jeremiah. And it's chapter 20, I think starts at verse 7, where he says, "You duped me, O Lord, and I let myself be duped." You tricked me, in other words. You were too strong for me. Everywhere I go, I am the object of derision. Everywhere I go, people look for a misstep so they can pounce on me.
Okay.
I will no longer speak your name. I've had it. In other words, he's having a really bad day.
Sure.
He's fed up with what he feels called to do, what God has put on his heart. He doesn't want to do it anymore. And the whole beginning of that passage is, I've had it. I'm done. And you have to think to yourself, how do we really think he said that to God? You know, Lord, I'm really tired of doing this and people making fun of me. No, I'm sure he was feeling it.
Sure.
You duped me, O Lord. I mean, you set me up. I can't get out of this now. I will no longer preach your name. And then, he says, but then it becomes like fire burning in my heart, imprisoned in my bones. I grow weary holding it in. I must preach his name. So this is what you just described. You're driving down the road. You're fired up about something. You're weary holding it in. You start talking.
Sure.
Oh, I guarantee you, saints did the same thing. I'm sure they probably walked in the desert, the wilderness, from town to town, back in the medieval times and before, walking around pre-Christian days.
Sure. Now, just to
Just
clarify
talking
things,
to themselves.
I'm not actually physically talking. This is all going on.
Yeah,
in the
inside your
mind.
head,
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm just clearing that up for people. I'm not riding down the road and you're seeing me. He must
okay.
be on the phone.
Well-
I do have my ear pods in, so it would look like I'm singing.
Sometimes I'm doing it out loud, so don't feel bad if you do. But no, I exactly have been in that same spot. But think about even that juxtapose those two concepts there that Jeremiah talks about. It is like fire burning in my heart, fire alive, burning, active, hot, moving. Fire cannot be contained, right? Imprisoned in my bones. What visual do you get? Just deep and and bound,
Right.
almost imprisoned in bones and fire burning in heart. Incredible images. He's trying to describe that something inside when God touches you and says, you cannot remain silent. It is too big. It is too important.
Okay. No, that's good. Now, just a couple more things here. One of them is in the workplace, and I'm sure you even get questions about this, but it's something that I think about often. Engaging the culture through your workplace. I guess I've got to the point now where it's or within the 10 years I came back to the church. I've talked about parts of my story, but in the workplace specifically, it would be very easy to turn somebody off very quickly by maybe being what would call too preachy or something like that. And I just see kind of right now is, just by, being as faithful as you possibly know how, that should be the example, right? And then always be prepared to give a reason for hope. That's kind of we're kind of, I think I fall. Should we be doing more than that in the workplace?
That whole question, and you're right, I hear that a lot. It's one of the most common things I ever brought to my, attention. What do we do in these situations? Our society right now is to a point where you can't wear a MAGA hat in some places without someone ripping it off, throwing it in your face, stealing it from you, spitting on you, calling you names, or saying it's no different than the white hood of the KKK.
Right,
I mean,
right.
You're going to offend somebody if you look at them the wrong way and call the wrong pronoun. Sure. I mean, we're in a society right now where so much is we're easily offended on anything. You're going to offend them for something. May as well offend them for Christ. Right. Now how you go about it, any given situation, it's a case-by-case, circumstance-by-circumstance moment. Sometimes family members, you might sit down and say, hey, look, I really got to talk to you about this. Sometimes it might be like, we're just going to show them kindness and charity and mercy and so forth. Sometimes we're going to put the foot down and say, this isn't happening in my home and so forth, because it's going to vary from time to time.
Sure.
Everybody's going through different chapters of their life. So if you're at the workplace and this person's acting a certain way, maybe you don't look at them and say, hey, look, did you know that that's blaspheming the Lord and that could send your soul to hell if you die in that state of mortal sin? Mortal sin, by the way, 3 conditions, full knowledge, great.
Right.
Okay, but you know what? Maybe that's not the way to approach it at that point. So I know one young lady she was working with a group of women at a framing store, and there's 7 or 8 of them around a big table putting frames together every day and so forth, and every now and then God's name would be blasphemed, and she'd just make a sign of the cross. Finally, one asked her, every now and then you just make a sign of the cross. What's going on? Well, every time you offend the Lord by blaspheming his name, I make a sign of the cross to try to atone for it.
Sure.
Whoa.
Wow.
But she only
and this had been going on for a long time.
Yes.
You're saying by the time that happened.
Exactly.
Sure.
And she said that the lady just looked at her mouth kind of dropped open, her eyes got real big, and she didn't even know what to say back. So that's one way of handling it. Now, there are a lot of people out there who use that phrase, which I think can be a cop-out at times. Evangelize always. And if necessary, use words. Yeah. Yeah, it's bumper stickers, T-shirts. Some say that St. Francis of Assisi actually said that. I've heard an expert on St. Francis saying that we don't know if that's truly attributed to him, but let's be careful because St. Francis is one who used words. He was a great preacher. He was a great preacher. When should when are you obligated to use words? If you're a husband and a father, if you're a mother and a wife, you're obligated to use words.
Sure.
You can't hide from it. If you're standing side by side as an employee with somebody and you're working in the same environment and things, depending on how foul they get or challenging they get, are you obligated to use words? Maybe, maybe not, depending on the circumstances. Everybody's got to make that call, but we should be in deep prayer so we can hear God trying to direct us in those moments.
Sure.
But don't live with this. I'd say, look, let's not live with this attitude of, oh no, just show them kindness. And no, there are sometimes you got to be willing to flip tables over because our Lord did.
Sure. Well, let's flip some tables.
Amen.
All right. One more.
Sure.
I got one more for you.
You bet.
All right. I had the opportunity to listen to a CD, and if you want to find these, just so everybody knows, go to battlereadystrong.com.
Yes.
But I happened to listen to one of your CDs, and the topic was modesty. Whew, that's a tough one. I have 4 daughters, so I have dealt with a multiplicity of different times and ages, all the way from late teens to young little girls. So I guess my question to you would be is, not the actual the modesty topic in like a general sense, but how do you specifically talk to your little girl or your teenage girl or your older teenage girl when when you know that what they're wearing is just not appropriate? I mean, I think all of us as men, I think I can say as a general rule most of the time, if we're thinking, we would know, hey, that's really not appropriate. But how do you handle something like that with your own daughter?
Yeah, modesty, and this is according to the teaching out of the Catechism, and the teachings of the Catechism are not just pie in the sky. A bunch of guys made this stuff up. They're rooted in church history. They're rooted in the Scriptures. They're rooted in great intellectual minds and spiritual masters. John of the Cross.
All right, what is the
Teresa of
Catechism?
Avila.
Just
Catechism of the Catholic Church. It is the book that lays out, in particular, very clearly, the teachings of the Church that we should all be living by.
thank you.
Very simple way of putting it.
Sure.
And in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it states that modesty is a virtue that is necessary for chastity, and chastity is necessary for salvation. So if you say you're living a chaste life, but you're not living a modest life, you're not living a fully chaste life.
Okay.
Modesty is not just, as some people would say, well, it's about clothing. Modesty is more than that. Being active, the virtue of modesty, being active in a person's life, is essentially this virtue that protects, and this is how the Catechism lays it down. It protects the, quote, intimate center of the person, unquote. Most of us never talk that way. Do you have an intimate center? And that intimate center was breathed into you by God. It is beyond understanding of how beautiful it is.
And that's the soul? Is that what we're talking about?
That's essentially, I think,
Okay.
where they're going with it in the
Sure.
Catechism, because that intimate center is that link to God. It's the breathing of God into the individual person. So modesty is about clothing. It's about conversation. It's about entertainment. It's about feelings. Modesty of feelings. Modesty is a word that basically means temperate. To be temperate.
Okay.
Okay, to practice the virtue of temperance, to where you are putting things in its right place for the right reasons.
So,
So-
ordered, so to speak?
Exactly, so
Okay.
that it gives God glory and raises and elevates your dignity, the dignity that God gave you. So when you talk that way to your children, if we present to our children and say, look, you have a dignity about you that God has given you. You are a child of God. You're a daughter of God. To your daughters, tell you are a daughter of God. To the men, you're a son of God. It's not the son of God, that's Christ. But we're talking about this children of God sort of understanding. We don't discuss it that way. We don't talk about it that way.
Sure.
We oftentimes reduce it to the point of, which needs to be addressed. You wear that, people are going to look at you like an object, and you're going to tempt other people.
Sure.
And that's true. That can happen. There's no question about it. But modesty also means wearing appropriate clothing for appropriate events. You can wear, completely covered in pajamas and walk through the store with pajamas and slippers. That's not really modest behavior, because that clothing doesn't fit that atmosphere. Okay? Modesty is about ordered behavior of feelings, emotions, clothing, entertainment, conversation at any given moment. I mean, a husband and wife can talk a certain way when they're together romancing one another that is intimate and personal, that they would never have that exact same conversation in front of other people. Is it immodest in front of others? Yes, it would be immodest if it's intimate conversation about their sexual life and so forth. That's between the husband and wife in the privacy of their intimate moment. It wouldn't be modest to discuss it in another location in front of other people, because that's reserved for them. Is it immodest just for them? No, it can be, depending on the conversation, of course. But if it lowers their dignity, then yeah, it becomes wrong. But if it's about them and it's so beautiful and wonderful, then it's okay.
Sure.
Because it's ordered, as you mentioned earlier, Paul.
Ordered.
Ordered.
Sure.
So modesty helps order things the way it should be.
So you've explained this now. Let's say your teenage daughter, let's say 17. You've explained this. They have they know where you're coming from.
Sure.
She walks out of the bedroom, walks right by you. She's going somewhere that night, and you're like, "Holy cow! What is this girl wearing? What do you say to her then?" Now, I'm saying the premise is already there. She now knows, but these are real situations. This stuff happens.
Oh, sure, it does. Yeah.
You know?
And the tough thing is, because our society is so counter to this truth of modesty everywhere, that even in the Christian world, modest clothing and modest behavior is oftentimes very immodest. You go back 50 years, it would be considered horribly immodest. You go back to 100 years, it would be scandalous beyond belief, right?
Sure.
So why is it so acceptable now? Well, because times have changed. Well, some of that can be because people have become desensitized and deadened to it. But also the objectification of people has risen through the roof right now. That's very, very, very clear. So if a daughter walks by at that moment, I recommend, hey, sweetheart, come here. I want to talk to you. And just have a conversation. We talked about this. No, I mean, sometimes you have to lay the discipline down depending upon your age. Look, in this house, it's your house. You're going to stand before God and answer for what happened in your house.
Sure.
And we have to tell our children that too. Two of my kids are now married and out of the house. They have their own households with their spouses. And we're at a point now where, look, we gave you the groundwork of this stuff. Now you two have to, you two, you have to decide what you're going to do with this and that. But now you're going to have to respond to God when you die about what you let to go on in your home. So have the conversation. And number one, I love you. I love you more than you can imagine. I'll fight for you harder, faster, and longer than anybody on this planet. Your dignity is worth that. God has given you that. I don't want anybody to misunderstand how beautiful you really are. And so I have to address this with you. Now, yeah, but Dad, I don't see a problem in this. I know, but not everything you see is completely true. Not the way you see it is not always right and accurate. And it's a tough thing. I realize that. A lot of prayer needs to be involved, a lot of conversation, communication, and sometimes a little conversation, communication, but just certain things need to be said. But also then, what are we doing in our own personal lives to show them that we take it seriously too? There's a great story of a teenage girl and a dad sitting there watching TV, and a scene comes on television. It's a very modest scene, and nobody changes the channel, nobody does anything. And it passes, and a little while later, the father says, "What'd you think about that scene?" Now, the fact that he brought it up was really good.
Sure.
She said, "Well, I was very uncomfortable with it. Didn't, feel right. It was immodest. Something happened on TV, and, my goodness, I'm here with my dad." Well, why didn't you do anything about it when you changed the channel? And she said, "Dad, I was waiting for you."
Wow. Yeah.
So we men got to step up. We got to live it, but then we also have to communicate it.
Sure.
Lovingly, but with courage.
Well, Doug, I can't thank you enough for being with us here on the show today. Maybe at some point we'll get you back.
Hope so. Appreciate the
and
chance.
Thanks to my lovely wife, Chris, and Felix. Thank you as always. You've been listening to the AngryCatholic.com radio show. I'm Paul the Angry Catholic. Don't forget to send me an email at mail@theangrycatholic.com and show me your thoughts. Stay active, stay alert, and stay angry.
This has been a production of Dumb Ox Media, Inc., all rights reserved.